Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the second of Sloan C 2013 Accessibility webinar series. For this webinar, we have our student and alumni panel with the topic, What Students with Disabilities Want Faculty and Administrators to Know. We have a wonderful group of panelists today, but I would like to first thank to our sponsors, 3Play Media, Perkins e-Learning, and University of Illinois College of Education for sponsoring this webinar series and for their contributions. We are very fortunate to have Kristen Betts, our Director of Online and Blended Learning at Armstrong Atlantic State University, and as a co-moderator, our Chief Knowledge Officer, Janet Moore, as our moderators today. With that, I would like to now hand the microphone over to Dr. Betts so that she can introduce our panelists and start the discussions today. Kristen, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and I want to thank all of you for attending today's session. What we're going to do to begin is we'll look just briefly at our panelists here and introduce them, because we're going to have a more detailed introduction in just a minute. We have Daniel Veit, who is currently a master's student in the higher education program at Drexel University. He's also working with Texas School for the Deaf. We have Alex Cohen, who is a graduate from the Master's of Science program at Drexel University and a current PhD student at Drexel University. Henry Alphen, who also has his master's degree from Drexel University and is working at Drexel University currently in Information Technology Services, and Dominique Williamson, who is currently an undergraduate student at Columbus State University taking online and blended courses, and he is a retired U.S. veteran. Our agenda is going to be very focused on the speakers. So we will spend some time in terms of the panel introduction so you can learn more about the academic, professional, and personal backgrounds of our panelists. We'll then have just two questions. The first question being what faculty and administrators need to know about accessibility and working with students with disabilities. The second question, strategies to increase online student success. And then we will open up the floor to questions and answers at the last 20 minutes of the session. The chat, if you would like, when we begin the second part of the presentation with the second question, you can start typing questions in, and we will certainly move those forward so we can ask our panelists. One thing I encourage you to think about, while the questions are the same, listen to the breadth of the responses, because for each student, there'll be similarities as well as differences. We wanted to start off with just some global and national data. A couple of things to consider. There's a wonderful report that came out from the World Health Organization in 2011, and it stated that we have over 285 million individuals worldwide who are visually impaired. 39 million of these individuals are blind. We have 246 million individuals who have moderate to severe visual impairment. When we look within the United States, 48 million Americans have significant hearing loss, either in one ear or both ears. And an interesting quote here, nearly 1 in 5 Americans aged 12 and older experience hearing loss severe enough to interfere with day-to-day communication. Some national data as well. Approximately 20% of the U.S. population report having a disability. And for individuals who may not be involved in the Office of Disability Services, maybe in a different role, these numbers are based on self-reporting. 10% of individuals in the United States self-report either an individual or a hidden disability, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. 11% of our higher education population with regard to students report having a disability, and it's often stated that this number is not as high as educators would assume it would be. And lastly, we have no available data in regards to our online students who have disabilities. With regard to veterans, something to consider, online programs are certainly going out and marketing to veterans, as are most colleges and universities. but we need to think about, in particular, disabilities that veterans may have. If you look at the statistics here, it is going to really be something institutions need to look at across multiple services. So 45% of the 1.6 million veterans that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan were seeking disability. What's interesting is they said earlier on 8 to 9 disability claims were being reported by veterans, and now with the new veterans who are coming back, they're claiming 11 to 14 disabilities. When you look at the overall number of veterans who have sought VA care, you have approximately 156 that are blind, 1,000 with impaired vision, you have hearing loss, you have 350,000 who report tinnitus, tens of thousands they talk about in terms of reporting traumatic brain injury, and then when you look at post-traumatic stress disorder, you also have almost 500,000. One thing to think about, especially as we begin this presentation today, is there is a spectrum within the area of disabilities. So while we may look globally at the fact that 39 million individuals are blind, there's a very large spectrum in terms of visual impairment. Hearing impairment is shown on the previous slides. I've brought up this photo here of all of the students who are presenting today because we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that we're talking about students. It's so easy to read the literature and look at the statistics, or maybe hear somebody say, well, it's 3% of the population. What are the chances of? Well, the fact is every student that we serve within higher education is part of our mission, part of our outreach, and that's part of our higher education commitment. So as you go through this presentation, I'd like you to consider any of these students potentially being a student in your online classroom. So as we go through, we're going to get back to Daniel Veit in just a minute. We have our interpreters that are going to be joining us in just a minute. We're going to begin with Alex Cohen. As I mentioned, he's currently a doctoral student. He has his MS from Drexel University, his Bachelor's of Science from University of Nevada. In terms of his professional overview, I'm going to have Alex tell you about himself academically, professionally, and personally. So Alex?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Cohen, and about 18 years ago, while I was attending the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, I was diagnosed with a degenerative retinal disease called retinitis pigmentosa. Over that time period, I have been slowly robbed of my vision till now I am legally blind. Despite this, I had spent 17 years thriving in the hospitality industry, holding positions as a director of sales and marketing, general manager, and eventually vice president of ultra luxury management property group. And through this time, I never allowed my vision to get in my way for any of my professional success. Unfortunately, the economy in 2007, 2008 did, and I decided to go back to school. Making and considering the choices that I had in selecting a master's program, I decided that the online MS in hospitality management at Drexel best suited my needs, as I do live in downtown Philadelphia, and I have a wife who loves her job and works in the evenings, and I have 2 small children at home. And so being older, or having certainly some different responsibilities as I did as an undergrad, the flexibility of this program really was the primary consideration for me. You know, my visual impairment never even really crossed my mind until I decided to contact the Office of Disability Resources here at Drexel University and see everything that was available to me. Upon completion of my master's program, I did decide to continue on, and now I am a first-year doctoral student at the LeBeau College of Business and Marketing here at Drexel University.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex. What we're going to do is we will move on now to Henry Alton. And Henry is joining us. I have some clips that Henry has provided for us, and I'm going to save the clips for some upcoming slides. And in terms of Henry, as I mentioned, he completed his Master's of Science in the Higher Education program at Drexel University, a fully online program. He is currently an MBA student at the Warwick Business School and also completed his BS in Economics at Drexel University. He is currently working as a business analyst at Drexel and also with information technology services. And he is a higher education researcher. I have 2 pages down below if you'd like to learn more about Henry. Lots of publications that he has as well. So we will listen to some of the clips that he has provided in just a minute. At this point, I will move on to Dominique Williamson and ask him to provide his introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominique Williamson. I'm a 20-year retired veteran from the United States Army. While serving in the military, I had the misfortune of getting injured in Afghanistan with some internal and psychological and physical injuries. Upon my retirement, decided to go back to school to finish my degree that I started. And in doing this, I realized that there was significant challenges, and we will discuss a lot of those as the webinar proceeds. But hopefully, the insight that we as soldiers will be able to bring to this forum will be something that will be able to benefit everyone in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominique. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to move on to our first question. And we've asked each of our panelists to answer what faculty and administrators need to know about accessibility and working with students with disabilities. So I am going to move on, and I'm going to ask Alex Cohen to provide what he believes faculty and administrators need to know from his perspective. Alex?
Okay, now it's important to remember that when I first began my online program, this was a brand new program at the college, and what I found was the lectures that were recorded over PowerPoint using embedded video were a wonderful tool. However, it did not work with any of my screen reading technology. So for example, if there were notes that I needed to go back to review, or any assignments that were posted via this video, it was an impossibility for my screen reader to recognize the text on such videos. So that was quite problematic, as all of my courses did have this. Now, upon request, the PowerPoints were provided to me, and all the professors and everybody were particularly helpful once the problem was brought to light. Additionally, in using an online learning platform, there are many other there's a much larger use of videos to meet learning objectives. Now, some of these videos could be interviews or documentaries and be much more verbal, and the learning objectives would not be missed without sight. However, there were several videos where there really was no dialogue, and it was simply captions on the screen. And again, even pausing video, screen readers do not read text on video. So at certain points in time, the learning objectives could be lost depending upon the videos used. Additionally, navigating around third-party sites, it really had nothing to do with the actual online platform. But for example, using something like EndNote, which is really a magnificent tool for reference and research, what I found was all of the training videos were simply that, videos, and they were not accessible, were not able to be used by any of my screen readers. And often the dialogue in such videos would be simply, if you click over here or click on this button, this is how to proceed. And without sight and without the use of screen readers, I felt quite vulnerable for the training. There are many third-party sites that you need to investigate in terms of research resources and finding information out there. And they are not always immediately accessible. And even with the help of ODR, who does an absolutely magnificent job in converting materials to make them more accessible, there's not always the expedience in getting the instantaneous information that you need to complete your assignments. Additionally, when these if these problems were brought up with my professors, everybody was really truly fantastic and willing to help. As I mentioned, it was a new program where many of these problems just weren't even considered, and nobody ever acted as if I was attacking their pedagogical efficiency or integrity. They just wanted to help, and the online environment really provided wonderful access to these materials. But these three problems were something that really carried on throughout the program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex. What we'll do is we will move on, and I have a clip from Henry that I'm going to share with you. So let me pull up this clip. I'm going to do screen share. Let's pull this up, and here we go. Wait, let me see.
As an online student, I've had several difficult experiences related to my speech impediment. First, I've consistently had trouble using the audio discussion boards. In Drexel's MSAT program, we had 5 minutes to discuss key learning points absorbed in the course. We also used voice boards and podcasts to provide an audio critique for other students regarding projects and various assignments. Yet, the voice boards and Blackboard had no editing functions. This means that I would have 5 minutes to express my thoughts, and accordingly, I would re-record the posting until I was content with the outcome in one take. This could and has taken hours. On a broad scale, the challenge has been a lack of available resources for students with disabilities in online learning. Unless there is a universal design process which promotes accessibility as a culture, then individual students have to self-select and report their issues in order to receive assistance. This is generally the case with brick and mortar programs as well, but the very existence of e-learning provides an outlet for many disabled students to obtain a university education.
Thank you so much, Henry, for what you've had to share. And again, consider all of these students as potential students in your course. So as we go forward developing our courses, these are things certainly to have at the forefront. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to ask Dominique, I'm going to give him the mic and have him share what he believes faculty and administrators need to know from his perspective.
Yes, good afternoon again. I'm going to speak primarily from a soldiers and veterans standpoint. One of the things that I believe that our faculties and administrators needs to know up front is that most veterans, due to the fact that we are starting school at a later age than the average student, and it is anywhere between 21 and age 40 that we decide to go back to school to get our degree. There's a sense of reluctancy there. And so because of that reluctancy, a lot of times we tend to shy from bringing forth the situation that we most need help in. And so what I believe that the faculties and administrators needs to know, they need to first of all recognize that they have a lot of veterans that's coming back that deals with multiple forms of PTSD and TBI issues. Some of them are memory lost. And so with understanding these disabilities, it will give the administrator and the faculty the foresight to be more aggressive in reaching out to the veteran that might be reluctant to asking for the help themselves. I think that's the first thing that we need to do. Secondly, most veterans, we have a significant amount of medication that we take to deal with some of these symptoms that we're going through, whether it might be Zoloft for antidepressants, whether it might be narcotics for the excessive amount of pain that we're having. So having an understanding of that will help the administrator to deal with the veteran as they're going through these moments. I'll give you a real example. While taking my classes, when I was online, there were times when, because of the significant amount of medication that I was on, it will cause me to get so drowsy that I could not fulfill my classroom obligation. So with my teacher having the insight of that, they were able to allow me to finish at a different time when I was not as drowsy, instead of just thinking that, I just disregarded them teaching that particular lesson. And so it was very helpful in that case. Also, I'm a mixed student online and in classroom. When sitting in the classroom, one of the things that we do is try to position ourselves up front so that we can watch the teacher's lips to try to aid in our understanding, because I suffer from tinnitus, so I always have a ringing in my ears. So looking at the teacher's lips will help me. With the faculty being knowledgeable of that, instead of turning their back to the chalkboard while they're talking, they're a little bit more apt to face the classroom and pronounce their words a little better and more adamant, so that we can grasp everything that they're saying. And lastly, when we're doing classes online, just to ensure that the material are large enough, and when we're doing stuff like the webinar, make sure that they speak clearly so that we can fully understand them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Alex, did you want to say anything about that as well, in terms of the materials being large enough?
Well, the materials sometimes, what is provided can really makes a difference in within the format. For example, at times, you would get a certain graphic or graphs or charts or very small print that would not be able to be, for me, either enlarged or read by my screen reader. So just paying attention to the content as well as the color schematic. For example, I still have some vision and I can see better when I have white bold writing on a black background. So sometimes nobody wants to sit through a boring graphicless, colorless PowerPoint, but sometimes the color blends really make it almost impossible to see.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex. I know we had commented on that earlier. What I'd like to do right now is we have Daniel who has joined us. So I am going to have Daniel provide his introduction. As I mentioned, Daniel Feit is currently a student in the Master's of Science in Higher Education program at Drexel University. I've been very fortunate to work with Daniel, Alex, Henry, and also to have met Dominique's acquaintance through the University System of Georgia. So Daniel will give you some information about his educational background, his professional overview, and then what we'll do is we'll move right on to Daniel's response to the questions that you just listened to. So I'll turn my talk button off and we'll begin with Daniel.
Hello.
Can everyone hear me? I hope so. I finally have my voices here today, and my 2 interpreters have just arrived. I know we are in different time zones. So again, my name is Daniel Veit, and I want to give just a brief background of myself. I am deaf, and I use sign language as my primary language of communication. English is my second language. I grew up K through 12. I went to public school where I was in mainstream, and I would make use of an interpreter during classrooms. After high school, I went to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. Some people know that as the only deaf university, and it is all teachers sign and all other classes students sign, so there's full access. They don't really use interpreters in those situations, and I didn't use interpreters in my 4 years. I got my bachelor's in communication, and after that I went to work at New Mexico School for the Deaf. I worked there for 4 years, and then I went back to my alma mater, and I was a consultant at Gallaudet for 6 years. And that's when I decided to start thinking about going back to school for my master's degree. I decided to find a university with a higher education so that I can continue my higher education, Now, my first time I used online, this was through this university, so that was a new experience for me. And so that's it. That's my introduction.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daniel. And I'm going to bring you up to speed with our questions in terms of what faculty and administrators need to know from your perspective.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you. Really, I just finished my thesis for my master's degree, and that was the theme that I had, deaf students that took classes online. And there was a few interesting findings with that study. First of all, I think the importance of I think everyone needs to know that I'm not speaking in behalf of all deaf. This is kind of my own experience. And there was had a population of deaf. For instance, there was a group of deaf who grew up using oral communication in their education, and they did well. They were very successful. However, myself, I don't speak very well. That's why I use sign language as my mode of communication. Some went to public school in the mainstream, and then there was deaf who were in the residential programs. And so there's, everyone's different. So some deaf and hard of hearing have actually lost their hearing at later times in their life. So they require different ways of communicating. So the question that you asked about a learning style, that's really a high % of people who participated in my were visual students, and that's a lot of deaf. That was not really surprising for me because that's how I'm a very visual learner. Now, as far as reading the transcripts, and that was also a lot of the context was auditory based, the lectures and PowerPoints with voiceovers. Myself, being deaf, I couldn't listen to what the voiceover was, but I can, imagine yourself watching TV with no voice on there. It's really hard to follow everything, and that's what it was like for me when I first started in the studies. Now, they did provide a transcript, and that changed, and that required more reading, and so that kind of conflicted with most deaf students who and their learning style. Also, another point that I would like to make is that for myself, growing up in K through 12, I had IDEA law provides services for students with disabilities, and that was mandated that the school must provide accommodations for students. So that was a new experience for me. I never had to go to an Office for Disabilities and request accommodations before. And then once I went into Gallaudet University, I didn't need to make those requests for accommodations because I had direct communication with all my professors. And then when I decided to go to Drexel University, again, that was the first time that I really had to be a self-advocate and request for accommodations for myself, and I had to learn that process. And that was something that no one really ever taught me, that skill, and it was something that I had to learn and develop that as a student with disabilities, and it was and really required that I be a self-advocate. And then the third thing I wanted to emphasize was that even though sign language was my first language and English was my second, during my studies, and a lot of students would agree with this, that they felt that English was their second language. And when I took the online courses, everything was in English. So imagine yourself taking a class in French. And I felt comfortable with my second language, but it wasn't really my native language. So that required me to, it took me longer to write papers and essays and really make sure everything worked out in English. And it's important that the faculty and administration know to keep those issues in mind when dealing with students with hearing loss.
Thank you so much, Daniel. What we're going to do is we're going to move on to our next question. And our next question is looking at strategies. So we've asked all of our panelists to provide strategies to assist institutions to increase online student success for students that have disabilities. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move first to Alex. And so Alex, we're going to begin with you. Okay.
Okay.
So we'll start with Alex in terms of strategies, and I'm going to do this because we just had Daniel speaking, and I'm going to get back to Daniel. So I'll ask Daniel, if he runs perfect, to mute his mic, and then we'll ask Alex just to provide his strategies.
Okay. I don't know if we want to move the slide ahead, but...
Yeah, I do. I've got it right here, Alex, right on yours. So if you are ready, Alex, I've got your slide pulled up, just looking at the strategies to increase online student success when you're ready.
Right, okay. Well, the first thing that I would recommend is to provide one stable resource throughout the university where people can go with the questions they may have. For example, I mean, what I've learned here at Drexel is this truly is a community and collaborative effort. So whether it's just professors and advisors, people at the library should be aware of certain accessibility issues, as well as students. And so if any questions or anything of that nature do come up, students and professors and any other staff do have that one stable source where, you know, that is an amazing question. I haven't been asked that before, and I know exactly where to find that information. The second is to be aware of the accessibility of content. For example, I was so excited when I first got my package welcoming me. It had all of this information telling me all about campus, online, everything that there was to know about becoming a brand new master's student, and it was all on paper. So it wasn't, I certainly just made a call to the Office of Disability Resources, and they were able to provide me all of those materials online so that I could actually use them with my screen readers. And it really made the welcoming experience that much more welcoming as the materials were accessible. This also is applicable for any type of training for the online programs. For example, I had mentioned previously about using the EndNote video, the web training. A lot of programs use similar training, and for the visually impaired, it's all but useless when the instructions are not either readable through a screen reader, or the language that is used within that instruction is just too heavy on visual acuity and less on content. Also to monitor changes within with students and with disabilities. For example, I have a degenerative condition, and when I first started my master's program, I was using one particular kind of screen reader, and as my vision worsened, I realized that I needed different services, and I might need something a little bit stronger. So for example, I currently use 3 different screen readers on my system. One is absolutely terrific for reading textbooks and articles. Another is much better for surfing the web. And the third screen reader that I use, for example, is much better at reading mathematical equations. Most screen readers don't recognize either summation signs or Greek letters, or offer inflection when recognizing the difference between a capitalized or italics letter. So by keeping the Office of Disability Resources apprised of this, and again, all of this is a collaborative effort. It really will help the students and actually help the Office of Disability Resources, and therefore the university, provide a better and more robust experience. And finally, I had the good fortune with a number of my professors where I learned that as you progress through education, in undergraduate it was really just learn the material, get tested on it, and move on to the next class. The master's program is a little less like that. It's more kind of get the learning objectives that you're trying to get. Align the course's learning objectives with your own. And so in doing this, from time to time there were assignments that might not be accessible. And so I would bring this to the attention of the professor. And the worst thing that they could do is to say, don't worry about it, or just write a paper or do something extra. And I said, no, I really would like to have this experience. Let's find a way to do this and work it out. And just with a little bit of thought, an alternative could always be reached. And I felt in many ways that I was receiving the same the same attentiveness and the same robust educational experience as everyone else. So really, I think my experience has provided me that I need to be my own strongest advocate. People are out there to help, but nobody knows, nobody's trying to be unkind or cruel by making something inaccessible. It's what I've come across in my travels is that people just don't know. They hadn't considered it and hadn't even realized that accessibility is something that that needs to be considered. But overall, I mean, this was an amazing experience for me. The Office of Disability Resources here at Drexel had been an amazing partner and continues to be an amazing partner throughout my doctoral program.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I am going to do the screen share, and we got it set up so I should be able to just pull up this one video. And we're going to hear what Henry has to share, and I'm going to bring up his slides in just a second.
I have 3 tips for disabled college students enrolled in online courses and programs. But these tips are mostly for those who have yet to self-select as disabled. First, be honest with yourself. Know your capabilities and limitations. Drexel has a 15-minute rule regarding technology. If you get stuck on a Drexel-related software roadblock, then you should no longer waste your time. You should seek assistance from the experts. It would be wise to treat a disability in the same manner. If you are unable to perform the task required of an online course because of your disability, then you have to let the institution know and seek assistance. In the same vein, if you educate yourself on available institutional resources, including tutoring, research assistance, including use of the library, and your institution's Office of Disability Services, then it will be that much easier to reach out for assistance. The sooner that your situation can be documented, the better positioned you will be to obtain structured assistance. Lastly, pace yourself. As a person who stutters, I know that infiltration, such as lack of sleep and also burnout, tend to make my condition worse. We can only do so much in a given day, week, or lifetime. Structure your day so that you can perform well in each of your tasks, especially when you are a disabled college student navigating the e-learning environment.
So I want to thank Henry for what he shared in these video clips. He took a lot of time out to make sure he was able to share his information with each of you. I'm also very excited to share that not too long ago, Henry did a voice-recorded PowerPoint presentation as part of an international conference, and his session was chosen as one of the top in the international conference. So with utilizing support services, our students are doing unbelievable things nationally and internationally. And you'll get a copy of all of these slides, so you'll have all of the written tips along with the audios as well. So Dominique, I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and then what we'll do is we'll go back to Daniel, and that way we'll be able to have Daniel's interpreters provide the responses that he has for us regarding the strategies as well.
Hello again. A few points that I would like to add that will increase the online success of the veteran that's suffering with disability. I believe first and foremost that each college professors and staff should have some type of veteran committee council set up that allows them to understand the adjustments that veterans deal with as they're trying to proceed in getting a higher education. I believe that should be the first and foremost thing. Secondly, I believe that when we're doing our assignments, one thing that teachers should be cognizant of is that dealing with migraine headaches and TBI, there's certain colors that will trigger those symptoms to cause the veterans to start having those adverse effects. So one thing that they probably should do is get a better understanding on what TBI is or the symptoms that the veteran might be facing, so that when they post something for us to read, the colors does not trigger the wrong response, therefore putting us at a disadvantage, because now we're dealing with the memories that we have gone through. Also, if they can be very flexible with the assignment turning policy, I think that will aid in our success. Oftentimes, when I've taken classes before, there's a hard date for when every assignment is due. But if they can put in a factor that there might be some symptoms that might have taken place that might cause us to not be able to turn it in at, let's just use for a time, 5 o'clock on a Monday. If we were down for a symptom that caused us to be out of it for several hours, and we were not able to finish that assignment because we were dealing with some medical issues, if we'll be flexible enough, and within reason, of course, flexible enough for us to turning our assignments instead of getting dinged on it because we were dealing with some medical situation. Also, when we look at the assignment, the posting the assignment in a timely manner, some of the times the teachers, they don't necessarily post it as urgent as we would like them to post it. And so it causes us to rush to try to turn our assignment in. The other day, we had a teacher that gave us an assignment just a few hours before the assignment was due, and then they modified it. That put the whole class at disadvantage, but more so those that's already dealing with the problems that we're going through already. And lastly, I would like to talk about modification in some of the reading projects. In one of the classes that I was taking, one of the classroom reading assignment that the teacher handed out was a war novel that dealt with some very explicit and vivid details of the tragedies of wars. As I began to read that particular book, all of a sudden I was overwhelmed with emotions and memories of what took place while downrange in Afghanistan. I couldn't no longer read the book, so I went to the teacher and I asked permission to disengage myself from that particular classroom reading, but if she could give me an additional book, I will turn around and read that one, and that would be my classroom reading. She was very helpful. She gave me a different novel because she was not cognizant of the fact that she had someone that was dealing with the PTSD and the different emotional issues that the scars of war left. And so when she gave me an additional book, I was able to read that book and do my assignment. And so I believe when we put all of these into account, I think it will aid in the success of any veteran that's returning back to school, because they will feel that the university, the faculty, and the professors are on their side and they are willing to help them. And I believe just those little help will cause us to triumph in everything that we strive to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominique, for your responses. We're going to move to Daniel, and I am going to go back and I am going to ask Daniel to share with us his strategies to increase online student success.
Hello, thank you. Okay, I would like to explain a little bit more about what had happened to me in the past. Whenever I first took a graduate class at Drexel University, the first week I really tried to keep up with what I was supposed to do with the readings, and I was pretty overwhelmed. And I was not able to do lots of things because of the voicing, the voiceover for the projects, listening to different audio-based types of contexts. And I had to withdraw. I went ahead and dropped the class, and I didn't want to pay for that. And then I left. I decided to leave, but the person in the Office of Disability Services contacted me and really did want me to come back and try again, which was very positive for me, because if it weren't for that person, I'm not really sure at Drexel that I would have come back. So within the next 6 months, I decided to try again, and I took one class, one at a time, not two classes. And I've tried to become a lot more familiar with the different types of accommodations. I really felt like I had to do a lot of trial and error throughout the course. For example, all of my classes had it's called key learning points, which the students would have to provide a summary of what they had learned the first 5 weeks, then the second 5 weeks, and so forth. And my other classmates were able to just stand and talk in front of the microphone and give an explanation. And at first they provided me a written text, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's going to require me a lot more work, because students can just talk for 5 minutes, where it's probably going to take me 45 minutes to type up the text. And I felt like that wasn't really equal access. And so we came to an agreement that I would videotape myself signing in American Sign Language, send it to the Disability Services Office, who would in turn send it to the interpreting agency. And they would have an interpreter do the voiceover for me. And we did that for a while, and then one class professor emailed me and said, you know what, something is off here. And that interpreter doesn't seem to have the, the course concept, the jargon, the proper terminology, and so I was going to have to change, maybe talk directly to the interpreter. And so, sometimes I had to add key words to put down on my videotape to include when I was signing, just to make sure that the interpreter was using the appropriate terminology. And to be a success, I had to do lots of clarification with the Disability Services Office and the interpreter, and it was a lot of ongoing stuff. It was very helpful. The Disability Services Office had a very open mind. They were willing to work with me, and so that was, I've heard of some other schools whose Office of Disability Services weren't very open, and they were trying to save money. And I understand that they have budgetary constraints and accommodations can be expensive, such as sign language interpreters and captioning. But the deaf students like myself are going to need that type of accommodation to be successful in school. Drexel University does a really good job of promoting and advertising different services for students that are going to be attending the university. And I would have liked to have seen, like, once I'm in the Office of Disabilities for the program, maybe to have given me a brief orientation about how to self-advocate, like what I need to say to my the faculty, the professor at the beginning of the class, what my needs are. And by the 4th or 5th course that I took, I became a lot more comfortable doing that for myself, knowing what to do, what to say to the professors. And it's all the faculty have been wonderful at Drexel University. They've been extremely supportive. Now, for the captioning portion, now online, these days, education is more and more audio-based content done through PowerPoint with voiceovers, or a lecture. Or sometimes you have to create a PowerPoint with a voiceover. It kind of varies, but it's occurring more and more. I have noticed, for example, that live classrooms, it's really nice to have the captioning that's already embedded there. Like now, we've got the captioning on for this, the webinar, which is wonderful. That way I can follow the PowerPoint and the captioning at the same time. It's better than if I get like a printed transcript of the text, and then I have to go back and read one and then click on another, and just to make sure that I'm on the right slide. And that requires a lot more work. So it's nice to have the capability to have the captioning already on the videotape, so I can see it at the same time and get the information on one part rather than two separate units. So now I know you already know that technology continues to change. Every student with disabilities always have their own unique needs, and they're all different. No one is the same. And I think it's really, really important for the Office of Disabilities and the students to know that they can see themselves as a pioneer, to try new things, and to find something that is going to be successful and to work. I didn't sit down on the PowerPoint slide, that portion, but I think it's very important for the administration to be supportive of the students with disabilities in general. I've already heard of some wonderful stories through my thesis, where some institutions take on campus-wide initiatives to increase accessibility for students with disabilities. It's very important to be at the top, not in the office, for disabilities only. Okay.
Wonderful. What we're going to do is we're going to ask the students, and I'm going to move to our next slide. We're going to ask the students if they have any closing comments. And we're also going to ask all of our online attendees, if you can post your questions in the chat area. What we're going to do is we have somebody who's going to moderate the questions for us, and they'll ask, you can ask one of the panelists, you can ask all of the panelists, whatever questions that you may have. We're very fortunate because we have 4 dynamic students, all with different perspectives, and it's a great opportunity to ask them questions that you may have. A couple of things to consider is we're bringing this together and asking our students for closing comments. Really the focus on universal design for learning, clearly listening to all 4 of the students, this should be at the forefront. And another theme that's emerged, listening to the students about being self-advocates. It's critical that our students learn to serve as their best advocates because they're the ones that are taking the classes. It's critical that they have the support, not just in the Office of Disability Services, but throughout the campus. And in all of the cases where you've heard the students and the alumni talk about working with faculty, all of the faculty have been very accommodating. And each of the panelists have also talked about how technology is constantly changing. And with that in mind, it's going to be important that we're as proactive as possible. So considering not just faculty development with regard to technology and pedagogy and different areas related to instruction and learning and assessment, but trying to make sure that accessibility is part of the culture of higher education and integrating accessibility into faculty development from point of hiring and ongoing and continuous professional development is really in the best interest of all of our students. So I'm going to ask, Daniel, do you have any closing comments before we move to the question and answer period?
No, I don't have anything else. Go ahead.
Okay, Alex, anything you would like to share as we begin to wrap up and move to the questions?
Certainly, just one closing comment. I mean, as you listened today, you heard from 4 students who have 4 very different disabilities and therefore different needs. It's an impossibility to appropriately wrap your head around all of the needs. As you look at what I need to be successful is completely different than what Daniel needs to be successful, or Henry, or Dominique. But just to be aware and have the consideration of the efforts of I guess, social sustainability and being inclusive and understanding that anybody with disability is just one of your students and they want the same experience as anyone else, and they just might need a little additional assistance from time to time to get there. And the students need to learn to be their best self-advocates, and professors and the university community as a whole will listen and hopefully provide the inclusive environment necessary to succeed.
Thank you, Alex. Dominique, do you have any closing comments?
I think I'll just caveat what everyone else has been saying. We can't stress enough that it is incumbent upon each student to be their best advocate, because we are the ones that's affected by the disability, and we know what's best for us. And so when we advocate for ourselves, we can interpret to the administrators, and then on the administrators' side, we would just love for them to be supportive of what we bring to their attention. And I believe when you put those two pieces together, you will have the greatest success.
Thank you, Dominique. Henry's also going to be taking questions via chat. So the chat area is open, and if you go into the chat area, as I mentioned, you can type in your questions that you have for the students. Zarin, I'm going to give the mic over to you now so you can begin with the questions. We did ask each of the panelists to share different resources with our audience.
For any student with a disability to be successful. Thank you.
My apologies, the audio is cut out on my end. So I'm going to ask Dominique. Dominique, before I wrap up with the resources, for some reason there was a silent patch on my end, and I think I may have talked over you. If you can just summarize what you had said, my apologies again. For some reason there was a patch on this end.
No, what I said earlier, I said just to caveat what most of the panelists were saying, is that we as the students, we ought to be the best advocate for ourselves, because we are the ones that's dealing with the disabilities. Therefore, we know exactly what needs we might have for the school to help us in. And with us verbalizing those needs, when the faculty or the administrator hears us and they are willing to assist us in those areas, I believe when you put those two things together, it will set the atmosphere for the best successful environment for the students to be in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you repeating that. In terms of the resources, we asked our panelists to provide us with a list of resources. As I was sharing, they're right here. We encourage you, particularly, I know Mark Riccobono, who's with the National Association of the Blind, he encourages institutions to reach out and look for partnerships, and it's the same way with the National Association of the Deaf. So you've got a list here to start with, and I would also encourage you to network. Penn State University, California State University System has wonderful resources. Many institutions have open access policies in terms of their resources. So there's no reason to reinvent the wheel when you've got wonderful access that is out there. So networking is going to be critical. So Zarin, on that note, I am going to pass this over to you to wrap up and also to take our questions.
All right, I have a few questions for Alex, mainly about screen readers, and one question is asking what he uses specifically for mathematical equations, what kind of screen readers, and one other for each, what he uses, or whether he uses a different one for different environments, and what his experiences are with video description, if any, and if he has noticed any increase in their availability. So I'll hand it over to Alex.
Well, Certainly. Well, I use the Kurzweil system to read textbooks. Now, I use JAWS to read mathematical textbooks and to use SPSS statistical software. It's the only system that reads that. However, there is something important to mention, that often, these systems are compatible with screen readers, but from time to time, when the updates are done with the software, those updates then render that software incompatible. So, for example, I actually have to use an older version of JAWS on a different operating system to work with the SPSS software that I'm currently using in my program. But it has been a great help with the statistics courses that I'm taking, because it does recognize the symbols. I mean, obviously some of the equations are still bananas if they're being read to you, but it does definitely work better than some other screen readers. Now, that being said, I really prefer Zoom text to surf the web and do research, because it doesn't read absolutely everything on the screen. My visual needs might be different than somebody who is completely blind. I don't need to have, I just don't need to know everything that's on the screen. So if you can imagine going to a CNN website or otherwise, it's just, yeah, it's bedlam. But it really, those three systems in tandem have worked wonders for me. With videos, sometimes what I have noticed is with videos, the controls are not accessible. So the pause functions or fast forward or rewind functions just don't really work. A lot of the times the instructional controls don't have whatever embedded text is necessary or recognizable by screen readers. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Alex. And we can receive further questions or comments through Twitter as well, so feel free to continue the discussions there, as well as Sloan C comments. Another question, a few of the questions were about Dominic and what colors, because he talked about some colors triggering migraines and being uncomfortable. I think he answered that by saying bright colors and backgrounds. Am I right, Dominic? Is there anything else you would like to add to that?
Yes, apart from just the bright colors that would trigger the TBI symptoms, one thing that I found to be helpful for those that might experience migraines or TBI symptoms is to wear dark glasses, and that's something that the university allows me to do. Just wear dark glasses when I'm in classroom setting. That way, the sunlight doesn't glare. Or when I'm using my computer at home, I put a screen shield over it to dim everything so that it doesn't trigger a migraine or TBI response.
Zarin, I have two links that I'll add in the moderator area as well, two articles from refereed journals that may be of assistance.
Thanks, Kristen. And let me see. There are quite a few questions about what is the best closed caption services, but I don't think that would be something our students would be able to answer unless I'm wrong. Has anyone has an experience with a great instant closed captioning service or a software? That's for all of you panelists.
Yeah, this is Daniel here. Really, I don't have a specific service in mind, but I want to point out that California State University decided to sign a contract with a caption service. that part of that was with a discounted rate on captioning services, and that helped save money as opposed to each institution signing different contracts. It would keep the cost low for the captioning. And that would be nice if all private companies would go ahead and provide captioning with their video. National Agency for the Deaf, or NAD, also has a lawsuit going on suing Netflix and CNN because they were not providing captioning. And right now, CNN does not have any captioning. It's a little ridiculous right now for this time of day. The court decided to rule in favor of with ADA and providing captioning, and the physical businesses would continue. But really, that's just one of the first baby steps, in my opinion. There's so much more that still has to be done, and it should already have automatic captioning, but the burden should be put on the universities to provide captioning services for the students.
Thanks, Daniel. Since we are on you, there is a question for you. It is whether you prefer alt text for or text-based description, or is it a matter of what the content is within the actual method, and both work well? Shall I repeat the question, or?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what you mean, what the difference is between the alt text and the text-based instruction or description.
Text-based
description. Clarify the question?
This is about the images. It says, does Daniel prefer alt text for or text-based description, or is it a matter of what the content is within the actual method, and both work well? I'm reading the question as it is. Well, we'll just skip it if we don't have an answer for that. I have a general question for all the panelists. Sorry.
I think the question is for Alex. I think the question is for Alex because it has to do with alt text. Although there may have been some confusion because both were talking about voiceover PowerPoints, because for both students, voiceover PowerPoints are a challenge for different reasons. But Alex, if you could talk about alt text, because I know we've dealt with this with presentations we've put together.
Sure. I mean, you know, what occurs with the screen reader is it recognizes where, for the most part, you know, the one that I like the best, ZoomText recognizes where your mouse is. So, for example, when you're using different software packages, if you hover over an icon, you might see the words come up, and then the alt text comes up, and the screen reader will read that. That also happens a lot with photos. So if photos are put on a presentation and alt text is used, if you hover over that photo, the screen reader will read that alt text and will describe what is on that photo or that graph or whatever the image may be. It does, you know, it is extremely helpful with icon buttons, because I mean otherwise I mean I can't see the icons, but I can hear like, okay, that's the print button, that's what I need. So I mean alt text is very important, and I would encourage anybody who's putting together some kind of presentation or course material, if they're not certain about the best methods to how to embed the alt text in images, that is something that any university's Office of Disability Resources should be able to advise them upon. I don't know if that was helpful.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. And another question for all of our panelists, I would say, do any of you have concerns about library resources such as the major databases, EBSCOhost or ProQuest in terms of accessibility?
What happened, our library has one of the best online resources that I've ever seen, really. I mean, between the Web of Knowledge, LexisNexis, and the myriad of databases they have, and the amount of ebooks available. I mean, it's questionable what would occur if I actually walked into our library and checked out a book and said, okay, how do we make this accessible? Because the truth is the library doesn't like it when you take their books to ODR and they have to hack off the binding and then scan the book for you. So that's an area that might still be up to question. But in terms of the online resources, I mean, what occurs is you go in and you get the article and you get it in a PDF format. Now, depending upon whether that PDF has gone through an optical scan process or not results in whether or not a screen reader could read a certain type of PDF. But at least at Drexel, what occurs is I will download a great deal of files, PDF files, and I'll send them over to Disability Resources, and then they will convert them to me in the Kurzweil format that I am most comfortable with. In terms of ebooks are also PDF format, and some screen readers, as I mentioned, do very well with PDF, and others do not. It all really depends on what you're using and this particular type of PDF. But our library resources have been wonderful for me, and our Office of Disability Resources has been very expedient in returning materials that I need.
Thanks, Alex. Again, anybody else wants to pitch in on this about the use of library? I guess not. Let's see. We have gone through the colors. And we have a comment from a faculty, I would say, who says he or she had a deaf student in a class I'm teaching online who dropped the course. I'm sure due to no closed captioning available in class videos. The school I teach for has design teams that create our course material and post that material to the course sites in my path, which is Blackboard. Is there something I can do that will make it better for such students that are deaf or even blind? So I guess the question is, what could a faculty member do if no closed captioning were available for deaf and even blind students? How could he or she help them in the absence of closed captioning?
Hi, this is Daniel. In my opinion, you should have captioning no matter what. It's the student's right to be able to have accommodations. The law sometimes prohibits students from getting accommodations necessary for education, but they should have had captions in the first place. As a faculty you need to contact the Office of Disability Services and make sure that the appropriate accommodations are made for the deaf students to have the captioning on the videos. And there's no other way around it. That's pretty much it.
Thanks, Daniel. And one other comment from another faculty member. I believe the last time I had hearing impaired students, the interpreter coordinator told me to expect the same from them as hearing students. Is that possible? One had partial hearing and the other one none. The one with partial did much better. Signing is like shorthand, so I believe they were shortchanged on class content and writing ability. What do our students think about this?
I do agree with the interpreter needed to be you definitely need to have the same expectations of all students. It doesn't really matter. There should be no bias. As far as I wanted to point out that sign language is not just a shorthand of English. Really, American Sign Language and English are very, very different. American Sign Language and English both have their each set of grammar rules. And sometimes there's no direct translation from English to ASL and vice versa. For example, maybe this, one student would consider English as a second language and they struggle with the written word. And you would refer them to go to a writing center for tutoring studies and additional support. And that would do for any other student. And as a deaf person, I would appreciate it if a professor would lower their expectations for me. I believe that they should expect the same out of me as they do for other students.
Thanks, Danielle. And another question is from an instructional designer. I'm an instructional designer. When designing our courses at Northwestern, we try to be as accommodating as possible. Everything gets transcribed. What would you suggest would be the top aspects of course design to consider when designing courses with our faculty? Also, what would you love to see in courses that you just don't see? What's lacking?
Because this is such a new medium, and as technology advances and you can do so much more as the learning platforms become more innovative. I completed my master's program in 2010. So I can only imagine how much better, or hopefully how much better it's gotten in the past 3 years. But nobody, as I mentioned earlier, nobody wants a boring, vanilla presentation. You need robust content, and it's gotta be fun, and it's gotta speak to the student. And unfortunately, sometimes these rotten disabilities get in the way with that. But for example, like with my situation, with the video, I enjoyed listening to the professor speak over the PowerPoint, and what was helpful to me is when the actual copy of the PowerPoint would be also made available so that I could go back and then my screen reader would read that, or I would have access to the notes. But it's just one of those things that disabilities are all so different, and the needs are so broad that how could you design something for Daniel and I that would really be thrilling to both of us? And the answer is I'm not really sure, because each one of our needs are so individual.
Sharon,
thank you so much. Go ahead.
There's actually a question for Dominique that was asked, and it said, Dominique mentioned that professors need to understand what students with post-traumatic stress disorder are experiencing. Who do you believe the responsibility should fall on? Should it be the student or the institution? And so, Dominique, if you could speak to that, because I know that's something that we spend a lot of time talking about. And I think it's really important, as you said, to really take a leadership role out there and work with our returning vets to be as open as possible. So Dominique, I'm going to pass this over to you. Yeah, I don't think your mic is turned on, Dominique. If you press on the talk, I think you turned it off just to mute it.
Yes, I heard only a portion of that. You blanked out for a minute. Could you repeat the last portion, please? Thank you.
Sure, I think it's probably the bandwidth. That's what happened earlier with you, so my apologies again. The question was, who should the responsibility fall on? You had mentioned students that are coming back that have post-traumatic stress disorder, and so should that fall on the student? How do faculty become aware of this? I mean, you've been a great advocate, you've talked about this, but for students who are more reluctant, what can be done? Because clearly faculty want to assist students with this.
Like I said earlier, I think number one, the priority falls upon the student to be the biggest advocate, but also I believe that the faculty should also have an understanding of what post-traumatic stress disorder is, because if the faculty does not have an understanding of it, if I bring it to the forefront and you still have no understanding of it, it's not going to allow the need to be met. But with the combination of the student being boisterous and the faculty having informational knowledge of the symptom, I believe it will set the environment for the student to learn best and for the faculty to assist the student best in the learning process.
Excellent response. Thank you so much. Zarin?
Well, we need to wrap up, but I have just two more short questions. One is about testing. What kind of testing tools they can recommend, the panelists can recommend, if any. And the other one is about the use of Web 2 tools. As online faculty designers seeking to make course materials accessible by everyone, universal design for learning, we sometimes fall into a lowest common denominator approach in which we incorporate no multimedia nor any Web 2 tools. And whether this is acceptable or not, or is this right in your opinion or not. And after these, I will have to wrap it up because we don't want to go over our time.
So it sounded like, Zarin, there were two questions. So the last question focusing on looking at universal design, that the common denominator is sometimes to just take technology out altogether. And so what are the thoughts of the panelists? And I say that just so our panelists have time to think about a response to that. Alex?
No, certainly. I would not take out technology because as innovation progresses and the use of adaptive technology progresses, at some point, in many cases now, the two have met up wonderfully. So I would not take out technology in any way. I would just continue to try and promote as much fit and collaboration between the two as possible to make it compatible, make it robust, and most importantly, make it worthwhile.
Daniel, any comments?
Not at this time, I guess. And the last one was about if the panelists had any recommendations for testing services. there are any input on this, I would like to get it. If not, I'm going to wrap this up. All right. Well, with this, we are actually 3 minutes over our time. I would like to thank Dr. Betts for her efforts and time for the organization of this webinar, and she's really an inspiration. And I also want to thank our panelists for taking the time to be part of this. And also, of course, many thanks to all of you who joined us today and enriched our discussions with your questions and comments. Just as a reminder, all participants from today's webinar will be receiving a follow-up email, and it will contain a recording link. We will also be following up with a survey to get your input and feedback regarding this webinar. Your comments are extremely helpful, and we appreciate your taking the time to complete these surveys. And I would also like to take this opportunity to highlight some upcoming Sloan C events in case you might be interested in. Our workshop schedule for 2013 is available at our website. And we have 2 more webinars on this series. Next one is on March 14th, and the last one is on April 23rd. We hope you join us on those as well. And our next conference, 6th Annual International Symposium, Emerging Technologies for Online Learning, will be held in Las Vegas, Nevada on April 9th through 11th. We also have a virtual option for those who will not be able to go there in person. With that, I want to thank you once again for joining us, and we hope to see you in other Sloan C Institute events. You can find more information on all these and more on Sloan C Institute website along with the recording for this webinar. Have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.